Hello, and welcome to Cheating Tales Lab. Thank you so much for clicking on today's video. We've got another thrilling story to share, and we hope it's one you'll enjoy. Now, let's get started. Matthew Wood stepped out of his car, briefcase in hand, and took a deep breath of the crisp evening air. The streetlights flickered on as he walked up the driveway, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. It had been another grueling day at the lab, but the thrill of scientific discovery always left him feeling invigorated. As he opened the front door, the familiar scent of home greeted him. "Betsy?" he called out, slipping off his shoes. His wife appeared in the hallway, a forced smile plastered on her face. "Welcome home, dear. How was work?" Matthew's brow furrowed slightly. Something about Betsy's demeanor seemed off. Her eyes darted nervously, never quite meeting his gaze. He brushed it off, attributing it to the stress of her real estate job. It was productive. "We're making real progress on the Sustainable Urban Development Project." Betsy nodded, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "That's great. Dinner's in the oven. I'll bring it out in a few minutes." As Matthew settled into his favorite armchair, a wave of dizziness washed over him. He gripped the armrest, waiting for it to pass. These spells had been occurring more frequently after work meetings lately. He made a mental note to schedule a checkup, then pushed the thought aside as Betsy brought in a plate of food. The next morning, Matthew arrived at the research facility, greeting his team with a nod. The conference room buzzed with excitement as they prepared for their upcoming presentation to city officials. "All right, team," Matthew began, spreading out a series of charts on the table. "Let's run through the key points one more time." As they delved into the intricacies of their Sustainable Urban Development Plan, Matthew's colleague, Shane Hampton, leaned in close. "You okay, Matt? You seem a bit off." Matthew waved away Shane's concern. "Just a bit tired. Nothing to worry about." Shane's eyes narrowed, unconvinced. "Those dizzy spells still bothering you?" "It's fine," Matthew insisted, redirecting the conversation back to their project. "Now, about the proposed green spaces." As the meeting wrapped up, Matthew headed to the cafeteria for lunch. He grabbed a tray and found a quiet corner to review his notes for the afternoon's crucial meeting with his boss, Tyler Nicholson. Absorbed in his work, Matthew barely registered the hushed conversation at the next table. Two interns huddled close, their voices barely above a whisper. "Did you see that video?" one asked, eyes wide. "The one with the passed-out guy?" The other nodded vigorously. "Passed-out husband used for hours, right? God, it's so messed up." Matthew's ears perked up at the phrase, but he dismissed it, focusing instead on his upcoming presentation. He had no time for office gossip, not with so much riding on this meeting. As the afternoon wore on, Matthew made his way to Tyler Nicholson's office. He straightened his tie, took a deep breath, and knocked on the door. "Come in," Tyler called out, his voice muffled. Matthew entered, noting the tension in Tyler's shoulders as he sat behind his imposing desk. The older man's eyes darted around the room, never quite settling on Matthew. "Afternoon, Tyler," Matthew said, taking a seat. "I've got some exciting developments to share about the Urban Sustainability Project." Tyler nodded, his attention clearly elsewhere. As Matthew launched into his presentation, he couldn't help but notice Tyler fidgeting with his phone beneath the desk. "So, as you can see from these projections," Matthew's voice trailed off as the room began to spin. He gripped the edge of the desk, trying to steady himself. "Matthew? You all right?" Tyler's voice sounded distant, as if coming from underwater. The world tilted, and then everything went black. When Matthew came to, he found himself lying on the leather couch in Tyler's private office. The overhead lights seemed painfully bright, and his head throbbed with each heartbeat. Tyler loomed over him, a glass of water in hand. "You gave us quite a scare there, Woods. Fainted right in the middle of your presentation." Matthew struggled to sit up, his mind foggy. What happened?" "Low blood sugar, most likely," Tyler said, his tone casual. "You've been working yourself too hard. Why don't you take the rest of the day off?" As Matthew's vision cleared, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Tyler's explanation seemed plausible, but instinct told him there was more to the story. "Thanks, I think I will," Matthew replied, slowly getting to his feet. As he gathered his things, His gaze swept the room, landing on a small, out-of-place object in the corner. A camera lens, barely visible behind a potted plant. Matthew's pulse quickened, but he kept his face neutral. "I'll see you tomorrow, Tyler." "Sorry about the interruption." Tyler waved him off. "No worries. Get some rest." As Matthew left the building, his mind raced. The hidden camera, Tyler's strange behavior, his own unexplained symptoms. Something wasn't adding up. That evening, Matthew sat in his home office, the lights dimmed low. He stared at his phone, debating whether to make the call. Finally, he dialed the number. "Jake? It's Matthew. I need your help with something." Discreet. Jake Larkin, an old friend and cybersecurity expert, listened intently as Matthew laid out his concerns. "A hidden camera? And you've been having these dizzy spells?" Jake's voice crackled through the speaker. "Matt, this sounds serious. I'll look into it, but be careful. If someone's targeting you, they might be monitoring your communications." Matthew nodded, even though Jake couldn't see him. "Thanks, Jake. I appreciate your discretion on this." As he ended the call, Matthew heard Betsy's footsteps in the hallway. He quickly composed himself, turning to greet her with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Everything okay?" Betsy asked, leaning against the doorframe. Matthew nodded, his face a mask of calm. "Just work stuff. Nothing to worry about." As Betsy retreated, Matthew turned back to his computer, his jaw set with determination. Someone was trying to undermine him, and he was going to find out who and why. The next week crawled by, each day a careful dance of pretense. Matthew went about his routine, all while keeping his senses heightened for any clues. He noticed Tyler watching him more closely, and Betsy's nervous energy seemed to intensify. Finally, Jake reached out with his findings. They met in a quiet corner of a local park, away from prying eyes and potential listening devices. Jake's face was grim as he handed Matthew a sealed envelope. "It's worse than we thought, Matt. The security footage. It shows Tyler adding something to your drinks during meetings. And that viral video you mentioned? It's you, man." Unconscious in Tyler's office, Matthew's blood ran cold. "And Betsy?" Jake hesitated, then nodded. "She's in the video too." "I'm sorry, Matt." For a moment, Matthew felt as if the ground had opened up beneath him. His wife and his boss, conspiring against him. The betrayal cut deep, but as the initial shock wore off, a cold determination settled in its place. "Thank you, Jake," Matthew said, his voice steady. "I need you to keep this quiet for now. Can you do that?" Jake nodded, concern etched on his face. "What are you going to do?" Matthew's eyes hardened. "I'm going to play their game and win." Over the next few days, Matthew put his plan into motion. He installed hidden cameras in his home and office, carefully positioning them to catch any suspicious activity. He began keeping detailed records of his interactions with Tyler and Betsy, noting every inconsistency, every nervous glance. As he built his case, Matthew reached out to an old college friend, Jameson Wilcox, now working as an investigative journalist. Over a secure line, Matthew laid out the situation. "Jesus, Matt," Jameson breathed. "This is huge. We need to be careful about how we handle this. If we move too fast, they might destroy evidence." Matthew agreed. "That's why I need your help. We need to expose the truth without compromising the investigation. Can you do it?" Jameson's voice was filled with determination. "Count me in. We'll bring these bastards down." As Matthew ended the call, he felt a satisfaction. The pieces were falling into place. Tyler and Betsy had no idea what was coming. In the lab, Matthew threw himself into his work with renewed vigor. His urban development project was gaining traction, and he used it as a shield, hiding his true intentions behind a facade of scientific passion. During a particularly intense brainstorming session, Sharon Reeves, the mayor's chief of staff, stopped by to observe. Her eyes lit up as Matthew explained their innovative approach to sustainable city planning. "This is impressive work, Dr. Woods," she said, her voice warm with approval. "The mayor will be very interested in hearing more about this." Matthew nodded, allowing himself a small smile. "Thank you, Ms. Reeves. We're excited about the potential impact on our city." As Sharon left, Matthew caught Tyler watching from across the room, his expression unreadable. The game was afoot, and Matthew was determined to come out on top. Matthew Woods sat at his desk, his face illuminated by the soft glow of his computer screen. The office was quiet, most of his colleagues having left for the day. He scrolled through a series of emails, his eyes narrowing as he pieced together the puzzle of betrayal. Over the past month, Matthew had meticulously documented every instance of Tyler's poisoning attempts. The security footage Jake had provided was damning, showing Tyler surreptitiously adding a substance to Matthew's drinks during meetings. But it was the trail of emails between Tyler and Betsy that truly made his blood boil. "Have you taken care of it?" Betsy's message read. "We can't risk him finding out about our little arrangement with Apex Corporation." Tyler's response was equally incriminating. "Don't worry, sweetheart. Another week of this, and he'll be too addled to notice anything. We'll have him committed before he can blow the whistle on our deal." Matthew's jaw clenched as he read through their exchanges. The long-standing affair was bad enough, but their plot to discredit him and their involvement with a rival company crossed a line he couldn't ignore. He leaned back in his chair, a smile playing on his lips. It was time to turn the tables. The next morning, Matthew strode into the office with a spring in his step. He made a show of fumbling with his coffee mug, spilling a few drops on his shirt. "Everything all right, Matt?" Tyler asked, his concern a perfect mask for his true intentions. Matthew gave a sheepish grin. "Just a bit clumsy today. Think I might be coming down with something." Tyler's eyes gleamed with barely concealed satisfaction. "Why don't you take it easy? We can't have our star scientist under the weather." As Tyler walked away, Matthew allowed himself a small smirk. The bait had been taken. Over the next few weeks, Matthew carefully planted false information, leading Tyler and Betsy to believe their plan was working. He'd stumble during presentations, forget key details in meetings, and generally play the part of a man slowly losing his grip. Tyler and Betsy grew increasingly arrogant, their guard dropping as they reveled in their apparent success. Little did they know, Matthew was documenting their every move, building an airtight case against them. Meanwhile, Matthew threw himself into his work on the urban development project. He spent long nights poring over data, refining his proposals, and reaching out to influential city council members. His dedication didn't go unnoticed. During a presentation to the city's planning committee, Sharon Reeves, the mayor's chief of staff, leaned forward, her eyes alight with interest. "Dr. Woods, this is truly groundbreaking work," she said as Matthew concluded his presentation. "Your approach to integrating green spaces with urban infrastructure could revolutionize city planning." Matthew nodded, allowing a hint of pride to show. "Thank you, Ms. Reeves. It's been a labor of love." As he packed up his materials, Matthew caught sight of Tyler lurking at the back of the room, his face a mask of barely concealed rage. The game was far from over, but Matthew was winning. Back at home, Betsy paced the living room, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. Something wasn't right. Matthew's behavior had been off lately, yes, but there was an undercurrent of something she couldn't quite put her finger on. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through her contacts until she found the number she was looking for. After a moment's hesitation, she pressed call. "Daryl? It's Betsy Woods. I need your services." Daryl Chase, a private investigator with a reputation for discretion, listened as Betsy laid out her concerns. "I need you to track my husband. His behavior. I think he might be on to us." "Consider it done, Mrs. Woods," Daryl replied, his voice gruff. "I'll start immediately." What Betsy didn't know was that Daryl was an old acquaintance of Matthew's. As soon as he hung up, he placed another call. "Matt? It's Daryl. We need to talk." The next day, Matthew met Daryl in a quiet corner of a local park. Daryl filled him in on Betsy's suspicions and her request to have him followed. Matthew's eyes glinted with a mix of anger and determination. "Thanks for the heads up, Daryl. I think we can use this to our advantage." Over the next few days, Matthew carefully fed Daryl misleading information. He'd make a show of visiting therapists, researching memory loss, and generally playing into Tyler and Betsy's narrative. Daryl, in turn, reported back to Betsy, further convincing her and Tyler of their success. Emboldened by their perceived victory, Tyler and Betsy began making bolder moves. Matthew overheard snippets of conversation about having him committed to a mental health facility, their voices filled with a sickening glee. Little did they know, Matthew was always one step ahead. As Matthew's project continued to gain traction, he found himself preparing for a major conference. The auditorium was packed with key stakeholders, city officials, and potential investors. Matthew took a deep breath, straightened his tie, and stepped onto the stage. For the next hour, he captivated the audience with his vision of a sustainable, thriving city. Graphs and projections flashed across the screen behind him, each one telling a story of innovation and progress. As he concluded his presentation, the room erupted in applause. Matthew caught sight of Sharon Reeves in the front row, nodding approvingly. Next to her, several investors were already pulling out their checkbooks. The success of the conference was a double-edged sword. While it secured significant funding for Matthew's project, it also posed a threat to Tyler's position in the company. Matthew could feel the tension building, like a storm about to break. He didn't have to wait long for Tyler and Betsy to make their move. The annual company gala was in full swing. Men in tuxedos and women in glittering gowns mingled, champagne flutes in hand. Matthew made his way through the crowd, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries. From across the room, he caught sight of Tyler and Betsy huddled in a corner, their heads close together as they whispered furiously. Matthew's eyes narrowed. He'd been expecting something like this. As if on cue, a waiter appeared at his elbow, offering a tray of drinks. "Compliments of Mr. Nicholson, sir," the young man said, gesturing towards a glass of amber liquid. Matthew smiled, taking the glass. "How thoughtful. Please, let me return the favor." In a smooth motion, he switched his glass with another on the tray. "Would you mind taking this one to Mr. Nicholson? Tell him it's a toast to our continued success." The waiter nodded, oblivious to the undercurrents at play, and made his way towards Tyler. Matthew watched as Tyler accepted the drink, raising it in a mock salute before taking a large swig. Within minutes, the effects began to show. Tyler's face flushed, his movements becoming erratic. He stumbled towards the stage where the company's CEO was about to give a speech, nearly knocking over a potted plant in the process. "I've got something to say," Tyler slurred, grabbing the microphone. "You all think Matthew Woods is so great, but let me tell you." Before he could continue, Matthew stepped forward, a folder in his hand. "I think that's quite enough, Tyler," he said, his voice calm but carrying an edge of steel. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption, but I believe it's time for some truth." With all eyes on him, Matthew began to lay out the evidence. He presented emails, financial records, and security footage, all pointing to Tyler's misconduct and his collusion with rival companies. As the room erupted in shocked murmurs, Betsy tried to slip away unnoticed. But Matthew's voice cut through the chaos. "And let's not forget the role my wife played in all this." Betsy froze, her face a mask of horror as Matthew continued to unravel their scheme. The board members present looked on in stunned silence, their expressions shifting from disbelief to anger. In the aftermath of the revelation, Matthew found himself in a private meeting with Sharon Reeves. The chaos of the gala had died down, replaced by a tense quiet as the company scrambled to do damage control. Sharon leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "Matthew, in light of recent events, the mayor and I have been discussing the future of our city's sustainability initiatives. We believe you're the right person to lead this effort." Matthew raised an eyebrow. "I'm honored, Ms. Reeves. What exactly did you have in mind?" "We want to offer you a position heading up the city's new sustainability initiative," Sharon replied. "It would effectively put you in charge of implementing the very projects you've been developing. And, I might add, it would place you well above Mr. Nicholson in terms of influence and authority." A slow smile spread across Matthew's face. It was more than just a professional victory. It was vindication. "Ms. Reeves, I believe we have a lot to discuss." As Matthew left the office that night, he caught sight of his reflection in a darkened window. The man staring back at him was battle-worn but unbroken. He had faced betrayal, fought back against those who sought to destroy him, and emerged stronger for it. The city skyline stretched out before him, a canvas of possibilities. Matthew allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The game had been long and brutal, but in the end, he had won. And now, it was time to build something new from the ashes of betrayal. The aftermath of the company gala hung over the city like a storm cloud. Tyler Nicholson, once the golden boy of the Environmental Research Division, now found himself suspended pending investigation. His office sat empty, a testament to how quickly fortunes could change. Matthew Wood stood in the doorway of his own office, surveying the scene. He'd won the battle, but the war wasn't over yet. His eyes narrowed as he spotted Betsy across the room, her usual poise replaced by nervous energy. It was time to end this. "Betsy," Matthew called out, his voice carrying across the hushed office. "A word, please." Betsy's head snapped up, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and defiance. She followed Matthew into his office, the click of the door closing behind them echoing like a gunshot. Matthew didn't waste time with pleasantries. He laid out a series of documents on his desk, emails, financial records, and stills from the infamous video. "Care to explain?" Matthew's voice was cold, devoid of the warmth it once held for her. Betsy's eyes darted over the evidence, her mind racing. "Matthew, it's not what you think. Tyler, save it." Matthew cut her off. "I know everything. The affair, the plot to discredit me, your little side business with Apex Corporation. Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" Betsy's facade crumbled. Tears welled up in her eyes as she reached for Matthew's hand. "Please, you have to understand. I never meant for it to go this far. I love you, Matthew. We can work this out, can't we?" Matthew pulled his hand away, his expression hardening. "Love? Is that what you call poisoning your husband and using him for your sick games?" He pushed a folder towards her. "These are divorce papers. I suggest you sign them." Betsy's demeanor shifted, her pleading giving way to anger. "You can't do this to me. After everything we've been through." "Everything we've been through?" Matthew's laugh was harsh. "You mean your betrayal? Your attempts to destroy my career? My life? Oh, and let's not forget, you'll be implicated in the criminal charges against Tyler. I hope it was worth it." The color drained from Betsy's face. "Criminal charges? You can't be serious." Matthew leaned forward, his voice low and dangerous. "Dead serious. You made your choice, Betsy. Now you get to live with the consequences." As realization dawned on her, Betsy's composure shattered completely. She fumbled for her phone, her fingers shaking as she dialed Tyler's number. Matthew watched her, a mix of disgust and pity on his face. Without another word, he gathered his things and walked out of the office. He'd already moved his belongings to a new apartment. There was nothing left for him in the home they'd shared. As the door closed behind him, he could hear Betsy's frantic voice. "Tyler? Tyler, we have a problem." Across town, Tyler Nicholson paced his living room, a glass of scotch in hand. His suspension had hit him hard, but he wasn't about to go down without a fight. He'd built his career on cunning and ruthlessness. Surely he could find a way out of this mess. The ringing of his phone startled him. Betsy's name flashed on the screen. He answered, his voice gruff. "What is it?" Betsy's panicked words spilled out, painting a picture of their situation. Tyler's mind raced, formulating plans and discarding them just as quickly. There had to be a way to turn this around. As night fell, Tyler found himself outside the office building. The security guard was easy enough to distract. A simple story about forgotten documents and a crisp $100 bill did the trick. He made his way to Matthew's office, his heart pounding. If he could just plant some evidence, make it look like Matthew was the one stealing research. Tyler rifled through Matthew's desk, planting false documents and tampering with files on the computer. A smug smile played on his lips. By morning, Matthew would be the one under investigation. What Tyler didn't know was that Matthew's hidden cameras were silently recording his every move. The next day, the board of directors convened for an emergency meeting. Tyler stood before them, barely containing his glee as he presented his findings. "As you can see," Tyler said, gesturing to the doctored documents, "Matthew Woods has been selling our research to competitors. He's the real criminal here." The board members murmured among themselves, their faces grave. Just as Tyler thought victory was within his grasp, Matthew stepped forward. "Interesting theory, Tyler," Matthew said, his voice calm. but I think you'll find this footage more compelling." He nodded to the IT technician, who pulled up the security feed from the night before. The room watched in stunned silence as Tyler's late-night break-in played out on the screen. The color drained from Tyler's face as he realized he'd been outmaneuvered once again. The board's decision was swift and unanimous. Tyler was terminated on the spot, and the chairman announced that the case would be turned over to the authorities. As security escorted Tyler from the building, his phone buzzed with a news alert. His heart sank as he read the headline, "Corporate Scandal Exposed. Affair, Corruption, and Betrayal." Jameson Wilcox's expose had hit the press. The article detailed Tyler and Betsy's scheme, their affair, and the truth behind the viral video that had started it all. Within hours, the story had gone viral, spreading across social media and news outlets. Matthew stood in his new office, watching the city buzz below. His phone hadn't stopped ringing, colleagues offering support, journalists seeking comments, even old friends reaching out to reconnect. But there was one call he was waiting for. When it came, he answered on the first ring. "This is Matthew Woods." "Dr. Woods," the voice on the other end said, "this is Special Agent Carter with the FBI. We've been following your case with great interest. I think it's time we had a chat." Matthew smiled. Everything was falling into place. Across town, Tyler and Betsy met in a dingy motel room, their worlds crumbling around them. They'd both lost their jobs, their reputations in tatters. But they weren't ready to give up just yet. "We need to fight back," Tyler snarled, pacing the small room. "We've got dirt on Matthew too. If we go down, he's coming with us." Betsy nodded, her eyes hard. "I've got some manipulated evidence from our encounters. It's not much, but it might be enough to cast doubt on his character." They spent the night planning, scraping together whatever they could to mount one final attack against Matthew. By morning, they were ready to make their move. Matthew was in his new office at City Hall, discussing plans for the Sustainability Initiative with Sharon Reeves when his secretary interrupted. "Mr. Woods? There are 2 people here to see you. They say it's urgent." Matthew exchanged a glance with Sharon. "Send them in." Tyler and Betsy burst into the office, their eyes wild with desperation. Tyler slammed a folder on Matthew's desk. "It's over, Woods," Tyler spat. "We've got enough here to ruin you. Your precious career. Your new position. It'll all come crashing down unless you call off the dogs." Matthew leafed through the documents, his expression unreadable. Doctored photos, manipulated text messages, even a fake recording. They'd been busy. "Impressive," Matthew said, his voice calm. "Desperate, but impressive." He looked up at Tyler and Betsy, a small smile playing on his lips. "But I'm afraid you're too late." He pressed a button on his desk phone. "Agent Carter? I think it's time." The door opened, and 2 FBI agents stepped in. Tyler and Betsy's faces fell as they realized they'd walked right into a trap. "Tyler Nicholson, Betsy Woods," Agent Carter said, her voice crisp. "You're under arrest for corporate espionage, blackmail, and attempted fraud." As the agents read them their rights, Matthew stood. "I've been working with the FBI to uncover a larger network of corporate corruption." "Your little scheme?" "It was just the tip of the iceberg." Tyler lunged at Matthew, his face contorted with rage, but the agents quickly restrained him. As they were led away, Betsy looked back at Matthew, her eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and regret. "I hope it was worth it," she hissed. Matthew's reply was simple. It was. In the following weeks, Matthew threw himself into his new role. The city's sustainability initiative was gaining momentum, with support pouring in from all quarters. On a crisp autumn morning, Matthew stood before the city council, ready to present his vision for a greener future. As he spoke, laying out plans for renewable energy integration, urban gardens, and sustainable transportation, he could feel the energy in the room. This was what he'd fought for, the chance to make a real difference. As Matthew's presentation concluded, the council chamber erupted in applause. Mayor Richardson stepped forward, shaking Matthew's hand vigorously. "Dr. Woods, this is exactly what our city needs," the mayor beamed. "You have our full support." Matthew nodded, a sense of satisfaction washing over him. He glanced at the back of the room, where Agent Carter stood, giving him a subtle nod. The investigation into the larger corruption network was progressing well. Later that afternoon, Matthew found a quiet moment to himself. He stood by the window of his office, looking out over the city skyline. In the distance, he could see the courthouse where Tyler and Betsy were facing justice for their crimes. A small, satisfied smile played on Matthew's lips. He'd been through hell, faced betrayal from those closest to him, and come out stronger. Now, he had the chance to build something meaningful, to shape the future of the city he loved. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, opposition, and likely more attempts to undermine his work. But Matthew was ready. He'd faced down his personal demons and emerged victorious. Whatever came next, he would face it head-on. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the city, Matthew turned back to his desk. There was work to be done, a future to build, and he was just getting started. Epilogue. 6 months had passed since the dust settled on the scandal that rocked the environmental research community. The city had moved on, but the ripples of that tumultuous period were still felt by those involved. Tyler Nicholson sat in his prison cell, the stark reality of his new life a far cry from the luxury he once enjoyed. The trial had been swift and merciless, with the mountain of evidence leaving little room for doubt. He'd been convicted on multiple counts: corporate espionage, attempted poisoning, fraud, and conspiracy. The judge, disgusted by the betrayal of public trust, had handed down a hefty sentence, 20 years without the possibility of parole. His days now consisted of monotonous routine, a stark reminder of how far he'd fallen. The other inmates, having heard of his crimes, treated him with contempt. Tyler, once the manipulator, found himself isolated and powerless. Betsy Woods hadn't fared much better. While her sentence was lighter, 10 years with the possibility of parole after 7, the fall from grace had been spectacular. Her real estate license revoked, her reputation in tatters, she faced each day with the bitter knowledge that she'd thrown away a good life for greed and excitement. In the women's correctional facility, Betsy struggled to adapt. Her attempts to manipulate her way to better treatment backfired, leaving her more isolated than ever. She'd lost everything: her marriage, her career, her freedom, and the weight of her choices hung heavy. Both Tyler and Betsy had been ordered to pay substantial restitution to the companies they'd defrauded. Their assets seized, they would leave prison with nothing but the stigma of their crimes. Meanwhile, life had taken a decidedly different turn for Matthew Woods. Matthew stood at the podium, cameras flashing as he cut the ribbon on the city's first fully sustainable neighborhood. Solar panels glinted on rooftops, electric vehicle charging stations lined the streets, and community gardens bloomed between buildings. "This is just the beginning," Matthew announced, his voice carrying across the eager crowd. "Today, we're not just opening a neighborhood. We're opening the door to a greener, more sustainable future for our city." As he stepped down, shaking hands with city officials and community leaders, Matthew caught sight of a familiar face in the crowd. Jake Larkin, the friend who had helped uncover the truth, gave him a thumbs up. Beside Jake stood Jameson Wilcox, the journalist whose expose had blown the lid off the scandal. They'd both played crucial roles in Matthew's journey, and he made a mental note to catch up with them later. The past months had been a whirlwind for Matthew. His work with the FBI had led to the uncovering of a vast network of corporate corruption, resulting in multiple high-profile arrests and a complete overhaul of environmental policy enforcement. He testified before Congress, advocating for stricter regulations and transparency in environmental research. On a personal level, Matthew had found peace. The betrayal he'd experienced had left its scars, but he'd channeled that pain into his work, into making a real difference. He'd started dating again, taking it slow, rebuilding his trust in others one day at a time. As the event wound down, Matthew found a quiet moment to himself. He pulled out his phone, scrolling to a news article about the recent denial of Tyler and Betsy's appeals. Justice had been served, but Matthew felt no joy in their suffering. Instead, he felt a sense of closure, of a chapter finally ending. His phone buzzed with a message from Sharon Reeves. "Great work today. The governor wants to meet. Your vision is going statewide." Matthew smiled, pocketing his phone. There was still so much work to do, so many challenges to face. But he was ready. He'd weathered the storm of betrayal and emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. As he looked out over the sustainable neighborhood, his vision made reality. Matthew allowed himself a moment of pride. This was his legacy, not the scandal, not the betrayal. This was the future he'd fought for, a future worth believing in. The sun was setting over the city, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. Matthew took a deep breath, savoring the moment. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to make a difference. And he couldn't wait to get started. In the end, Matthew Woods had not just unmasked the poison that had threatened to destroy him. He transformed it into the catalyst for positive change, turning personal tragedy into triumph for an entire city. And that, he realized, was the sweetest victory of all.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy the story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.